Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending today's session on ethics. Just a couple of reminders before we get started. Please keep your cameras off to eliminate distraction, as well as your microphones. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box, and there will be a spot during the presentation where we can ask questions. I think that is it. So I will turn it over to Heidi Nieuswma.
Thank you, Kylie. Welcome everybody to an ethics presentation that I was asked to give. I think Kylie reached out to me a couple months ago and I thought to myself, of course I'll help. I will be all caught up with my work and I'll be ready to roll. And all of a sudden I get an email, are you ready for the ethics presentation? And just like all of you, I'm like, oh my goodness. I never did get all my work done. I never did get caught up. So I just really appreciate that all of you have shown up today, because I do believe one of the reasons that I give an ethics presentation is because I believe it matters that we all know what ethics is and how we can contribute to it and make it positive in the life of our clients and positive in the life with all of our colleagues. My name is Heidi Nieuswma and I work at the University of Mary. And before going to the University of Mary, I did work for the state of North Dakota, and then I was also on the Board of Social Work Examiners for 6 years. And I think that's really where I developed my passion for understanding ethics and how it applies to myself, my colleagues, and our clients. One thing that I just want to start with is I'm not sure if you know who is all on this presentation and what your roles are. One of the reasons that I'm always involved in talking about ethics is because for every there's a law that if you have a license and if there is a licensable profession, that profession has to have a code of ethics for the licensed professionals to adhere to. And so for those of you that are licensed, you have probably a clear understanding of what it is that's expected to you in working with clients, because you have to follow a professional code of ethics. Where it gets a little muddy sometimes is if you are in a profession that isn't licensed, but yet you're expected to kind of walk the line in a certain way in working with our clients and working with our colleagues, but we really don't know sometimes what that even is. So if we don't understand what's expected of us, sometimes it's hard to know. Sometimes it's hard to know where do we go from here. And so that is why I'm really passionate about sharing the knowledge that I have in ethics. And so what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about the what, we're going to talk about the why, and we are going to talk about the how. And so the agenda that I decided to follow today was to just basically get us all on the same page and talk about some definitions. Then we'll take those definitions and those terms and we'll dig into them a bit deeper. We're going to talk about, why do we have ethics? Who has to follow ethics? And then we're going to talk about the basic core ethical principles. And then we're going to throw something in the mix is what happens if we're trying to follow those principles and you start looking at them and saying, well, this principle could apply, this a principle could apply. How are we supposed to know what direction we're supposed to take with our colleagues, ourselves, and our clients? And then we'll finish up with a little bit of a summary. So my first part is always just to give an introduction of why it's important in the helping profession. And so this is whether you are licensed or not. Anytime you are in a helping profession, when your job revolves around helping somebody else make a change in their life, ethics are a means to protect the welfare of the client and the employees by outlining what is appropriate. So what is the right thing to do? Employees and organizations in our professions come across some very difficult and sensitive subjects. And I really don't even have to go through many of them today because this is the life that you guys live with your clients. This is nothing new to you to walk into difficult and sensitive subjects every day. And so when we do that, it can leave the client and yourselves and the organization in a vulnerable position of knowing what to do next. Ethics really matters. And I just want to just take a minute to talk about why. It really does. If we're following ethics, it really does promote trust between employers and clients. And we all know that if our clients have a way where they can trust us, there is going to be more success in you helping them change and help them meet their goals. It also ensures that there's fair treatment and equity for all clients, especially those who are vulnerable. Again, I would imagine that that is almost every one of your clients. They fit into that category. And it also fosters a safe and healthy environment for you, your colleagues, and your employer. And ethical standards, what they do is they protect the right, they protect, excuse me, the client dignity, the autonomy, and the rights of your clients. And so one of the terms that I think it comes up in several slides. So I just wanted to review it a little bit further before we get started. And that's autonomy. You're going to find that word floating around in the next hour and a half. And so sometimes I think it's easier to start with, what does lack of autonomy mean? So if we're supposed to be providing our clients autonomy, what would that look like on the opposite end of that? What would lack of autonomy mean? So lack of autonomy is anybody that has lack of autonomy is really controlled by others, what they think, what they feel, and then what they do is they make their decisions based upon what others think and feel, not so much what they think and feel, and they might have difficulty making decisions. So you're going to find that it's very common that your clients will look at you and they'll just come right up and say, well, what would you do if you were in this situation? What would you do? Well, what do you think I should do? Do you think I should sign this? Do you think I shouldn't sign this? Do you think I should take this apartment? Do you think I should wait? What do you think? And so what we really want to try to do within the realm of ethics is we want to try to help them have autonomy and help them make them decisions themselves. We want to offer them good choices. We want to offer them just some sound ways that they can help meet their goal. But we really want to build them up enough and give them the autonomy so that they can make their own decisions. So autonomy then would be a term used to describe a person or a government's ability to make their own decisions. And we want them to speak on their own behalf without interference from another party. I know there were often times when I would be doing direct practice, where I would be working really hard to provide autonomy to my client, and they would say to me, well, so and so said that they think I should do this, or they think I should do this, or this is their recommendation. And so then really what ends up happening is when they have free choice, sometimes they have a difficult time making a decision because you guys are so important in their lives that they really weigh heavily on what you're saying and what you're recommending. And so we have to learn how to put people in a position of making their own decisions based on the information that we provide them. So it is really an important element of what we do. A lot of times in situations for you guys, it might be about housing options. It might be about signing a form. It might be about something having to do with their medical situation that they're in. And so I just wanted to kind of set that aside of what does autonomy mean and what does lack of autonomy probably look like. Here are some basics before we move any further. Oftentimes people confuse ethics, values, and beliefs. And so we're just going to go through that. And of course, I did put dictionary up there because these are not my definitions. I don't talk about Greek words that often, but here's ethics is actually derived from the Greek word ethos, which means a way of living. It's a branch of philosophy that is concerned with human conduct, more specifically, the behaviors of individuals in society. A system of moral principles that includes ideas about right and wrong and how people should or should not behave in general or specific cases. So I would imagine that when you're looking at that in that second paragraph, you could say a system of moral principles based on whose morals, based on whose ideas, based about who says what's wrong, who says what's right, or how should people behave in general or specific cases. That might be different to everybody, but that really is the definition of ethics. Then we go on to values, and we talk about that definitions, and those are individual beliefs that motivate people to act one way or another. They serve as a guide for human behavior. Generally, people are predisposed to adopt the values that they are raised with. And we're going to go into that a little bit more and why that really kind of can make this a little bit more confusing if we get our values and ethics confused. And then people also tend to believe that those values are right because they are the values of their particular culture. I sat with many people where their values may have been different than mine or different than values that could probably keep them safe or could keep them out of harm. And then we go to beliefs, and it would be any deep belief that is fundamental to a person's interactions with the world or their sense of self. It's a core belief, and it can be positive, negative, or neutral. So some examples, I always think it's nice to attach some beliefs, some examples. So beliefs are about goodness. A person's belief that they are good or bad, or what other people are mostly good or bad. About likability, beliefs such as I am lovable and I am likable. So it's something, it's a deeper sense of what somebody feels and thinks. So let's go on to the next slide here. We're going to just go and we're going to dig a little deeper. And I had this in the slide last time I gave this presentation also. It's so how do we get started is really we just quit talking and begin doing. So I will quit rambling and we're just going to keep on going on here. I'm going to add a little bit more about why is it important to study ethics. It is literally involved in everything we do every day, whether we are at work, whether we are at home, whether we are playing, whether we are, seeking out entertainment, whatever it may be. Ethics are involved in everything we do. And why we want to study them is because we have to understand why choices have been made against others. And we want to know and understand how to choose right from wrong. So then we go on to the tricky question about what I said in the last couple of slides is like, how do we know, but who decides what is right and wrong? So when it comes to ethics, now these are not values and these are not beliefs, but these are ethics. So who decides what's right and wrong? It seems simple, but it's pretty, when I teach this, I talk about laws and ethics, and then I just said ethics and laws because it's vice versa. So law is the law. So ethics goes back to the law. The ethics of society should influence the laws that society makes. And then ethics over time should change the laws. So, however, the law is always the law, no matter what your ethical beliefs are, and have to be followed. So, when we talk about beliefs and values, and sometimes how they get rolled into what people think might be ethical, we have to remember that the law is always the law. Policies are policies, and so laws are laws. So, that's where we start with this. But then, who influence ethics? And this is where it can, when I was talking about how it can get so muddy, this is where it can get muddy. If you just look at your own self, how has your family influenced, for the good, the bad, the ugly? How has your family influenced what you believe should be right or wrong? Or how about your friends? How about the community that you were raised in or the society that you're in? Some of you were raised in very small communities, maybe where there were 400, 500 people in your community, where others of you were raised in communities where there are hundreds of thousands of people in your community. All those differences can really impact who's influencing your ethics. Then we add on to that component the religion and spirituality. And then role models that we have in our life, your workplace. I would imagine that a culture has already been created in the environment that you work in. How does your workplace influence the ethics that you follow? And then I talked about this in the beginning slide, was about the professional bodies and the code of conduct. And then again, the politics and the laws and ourselves. Let's go ahead and talk further about some of the ethical lens that we want to use for this presentation. So the lens that I chose for this was every day we are faced with making decisions from, am I going to get out of bed today or not, right? That's our first decision. Am I going to wake up? Am I going to get ready? Am I going to go? So every day we are faced with making decisions. Some of these decisions are clear cut. Yep, I'm going to get up and go because I need money to pay for things. So I better get up and go to work, right? So some of these decisions are clear cut. But some of them, which might be a little more hard for us, we're going to talk about some of those. We are faced with so many range of options, and many which are equally valid or equally unsatisfactory. So then what ends up happening is we apply ethical thinking and it'll assist us in making a better choice. So when we have those decisions that we have to make, where do we go to find out how to move forward in making our decision? We have to apply some type of thinking behavior that goes along with that. And so what ethics are, it truly is, it's a process of reflection. If I do this, this could happen. If I do this, that could happen. And so it's that process of the reflection. And what it does, it aims to challenge our thoughts and actions. So ethics will take a really good look at how we behave and function within society. I think, does anybody have initial questions or thoughts just on those brief definitions or anything that we've talked about so far? Kylie, do you see anybody that's maybe asked any questions for us?
Not at this time.
Okay, all right. We'll have another session later, okay? So what are some of the core principles of ethical, core ethical principles? So there are 8 of them that I chose today to talk about. The first one is beneficence. Number one, that's a really hard word to say for me, and so is the next one. So I always have to be careful with that. But so in the first one, the beneficence. So I'm going to just read that definition for you. I want to see something here. Okay. Let me just go through into the beneficence. I'm not going to read all of these 8 off because they're in my next slides. So here's the definition of this one. So persons are treated in an ethical manner, not only by respecting their decisions and protecting them from harm, but also making efforts to secure their well-being. This term is often understood to cover acts of kindness or charity that go beyond strict obligation. In this document, it's understood in a stronger sense as an obligation, but there are 2 general rules that we follow. And it's been formulated as expressions of beneficent actions in this sense: do no harm and maximize the possible benefits and minimize possible harms. And so I chose just a couple. I think I just chose one example here that I want to talk about that could actually fit into this principle. And this is one thing that I think some of us who are in the helping profession may have a harder time with. And what it really is, it's boundaries with clients. We all want to be kind, and if you're in this profession, you're wanting to help others. And so that's really what gets us interested in being here. But when we talk about this, we want to respect people's decisions, and we want to do no harm to somebody. So under this principle, we really have to be careful with maintaining professional boundaries. We work with people who are very vulnerable, and sometimes they could take our kindness in a way that could harm them. And so we are the ones that have to have maintain those professional boundaries. And what that looks like, we want to clearly define and maintain those boundaries to avoid conflicts of interest or exploitation. We want to be mindful of emotional attachment, maintaining that professionalism in the key. We work with so many people where the world and people in the world have not been kind to them, whether it was because they did something that was unkind, and then they received that backlash of treatment of harming somebody themselves. And so we want to make sure that we're not doing that in return to them. Um, and so we just have to make sure that we have professional boundaries when we're working with our clients. There is definitely a clear way to show kindness, caring, and empathy without um, breaking and having non-professional boundaries. And so that can fall right under this principle, because if we do have poor boundaries, this is where we could really hurt some of those people. And we have to teach them, and we have to be good mentors, that people can be kind to you, but we can still remain professional. Another one that falls under this would be avoiding dual relationships. We want to make sure that we do not engage in personal or social relationships with clients that may compromise those professional ethics. When I was on the board of social work, this was a tough area for some of our professionals. And they from time to time, they ended up going into being personal friends of clients, or they ended up maybe having some relationships with clients that were not professional. And there's actually, because it is a licensed profession, there are some strict guidelines there. But I would highly recommend that even if you don't have a license to practice in what you're doing, that you avoid dual relationships. And I think it can really help um, following this one core principle. The next one I want to talk about is non-maleficence. And that is the principle of refraining from causing intentional harm toward another. And this goes right along with the one that I was just talking about. It's a deliberate infliction of negative act or effect on another individual or group. It indicates that a person genuinely works for a positive outcome for those whom they come in contact with. And I know that sometimes this can be really difficult if the burnout within your organization or within the work that you do starts to increase. Sometimes this is where this principle might break apart. We want to always make sure that whoever we're working for, we can help them create the most positive outcome when we're working with them. And if we get to a point where we've lost that in the work that we do, it can really break down as being a core principle that we're able to still follow. An action that we do must not be intrinsically wrong. A good effect must be intended by the action. The good outcome must not be a byproduct of a bad effect. And if there are negative outcomes of an action, the good outcome of the action must outweigh the bad. And so that is how we want to really follow this principle of non-maleficence. The next one we want to talk about, I think that people are I think they pretty much understand this principle compared to the first two that we talked about, and that's respect for persons. And that can look differently depending on what respect to persons, what that means to you, right? Because we sometimes mirror what it looks like to us, and then we can do that with other people. But incorporates two ethical convictions. First, that individuals should be treated as autonomous agents. So there's that word again. We want to make sure that we're treating them in a way that we want them to have the freedom to govern themselves or control their own affairs. And the second is that the person with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. So if a person is not able to have their own autonomy, that is where some of you have probably worked with people who have had some of their rights stripped with them and they have a guardian. And so those might be some of those people that they have diminished autonomy because they have somebody in their life that is making their decisions for them. And then respect is about respecting other people's wishes and supporting them in their decisions. So one thing that I talk about with this section has to do with cultural sensitivity and ethics, and just kind of understanding what that means. In many of the professions that we work with interdisciplinary professions, one of the big key words is having always learning and gaining cultural competence. And so now that term is kind of changing. And what we're saying now is that we really want people to have a cultural humility, because cultural competence can be really difficult to attain because there are so many different cultures, and we can't be expected to know everything about everybody's culture. And so now what we want to do is we want to kind of turn that a little bit and just have cultural humility. And what that looks like is just being aware of the diverse backgrounds of clients and how those influences how can we meet their needs, and how can we make sure that that has value. We also always want to respect cultural differences in making decision making, family dynamics, and communication. One of the times where I was first confronted in my professional life with cultural diversity and cultural differences was when I was going into somebody's home, and they were expected to. I believe they had 3 children, and they were expected to have so many different bedrooms because the amount of children they had and the different genders of their children. And according to the paperwork that I had, if they didn't have so many bedrooms in their apartment, that means that I had to write that down. And that was a very negative connotation on the report that I was writing. Having that cultural humility, knowing that they had just come to our country, and knowing that in their country, um, it was very normal for them to all live in one bedroom. And so that was a part of their culture. That was a part of their closeness. That was a part of the way they lived their life. And so I still had to write my report stating the facts of what I had seen, but I could also just add a little section under other saying, in addition, this is what I saw. And so that's what cultural humility can mean, and respect for persons. Ways that we can become more competent so that we can be more show more humility is we can engage in training and learning and understanding and just being more sensitive in those ways. And excuse me, and then we can also at times adapt services to meet cultural individual needs of clients. And so I just wanted to point that out there within respect and what that can look like in your daily work. Another principle is accountability. Um, if we are ethical and we are leading in that way, we have to have an acceptance of responsibility for ethical and honest and conduct towards others. I always used to raise my kids in a way where I told them, um, I'm not a big fan of lying, and I think all my children would tell you that. And it's because I always told them that I am always strong enough to hear the truth. It might hurt, it might not feel good, but I can accept the truth, even if it's hard, more so than I can accept dishonesty. And so I would like to encourage you all just to try to find a way to be assertive and accept that responsibility for being honest and ethical conduct towards another. Because if we can work towards a common ground, even if we have differences, we should be able to meet this one. Another one is fidelity. It's a principle that can best be described as keeping your word to patients. So stick to what you say. If you don't, then your words won't mean anything. So we want to make sure that we don't want to get backed into a box with trying to please somebody and saying, yes, we can do that for you. Yes, we will do that. We will do this. We will do that. Yes, it will happen. There are ways in which we can work with people to just be honest and just say, I hope this is how it works, or I hope this is what I'm going to do on my end. I can't make any promises. That doesn't mean that person isn't going to trust you more. That doesn't mean that that person isn't going to continue working with you, right? But it's always much better to be honest in that moment and to stick with that and keep your word, than it is to try to backpedal. And so that is just one of those ethical principles. If we can just stick to what we say, and just be honest up front, I think that that's a great principle to follow there with the ethics. Another one is confidentiality, and I believe this is probably going to I do have my notes in front of me too, because I want to stay on track a little bit here. Well, I shouldn't say I want to stay on track a lot here. But with ethics, there's always confidentiality. Um, with most of us, we follow HIPAA, we follow FERPA, we follow policies and procedures that are set in front of us. It refers to the duty to protect privileged information and to share entrusted information responsibly. It stems from the notion that a person's wishes, decisions, and personal information should be treated with respect. That goes right back to the previous slide, with respect. So the duty of confidentiality can apply to individuals, organizations, and institutions. And so confidentiality, I'm sure that you have all been trained in that, and it is a principle of ethics. So if you can follow that one, I think that you're going to be on your way to really following most of these principles that we talk about today. And then honesty, speaking and acting truthfully, it's more than not lying, deceiving, stealing, or cheating. It entails showing respect towards others and having integrity, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles and a moral uprightness. And then self-awareness is the other part of this. It's the conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires, the process can be painful, but it leads to greater self-awareness. And so if we can have integrity, and if we can be self-aware of any of these areas within these principles of where we need work or where we want to get better, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and we don't have to have all these principles mastered, but just knowing that they exist. And I think it's a good way to start following. They are essential for success in life. And they are really good news that if anyone can develop, um, we can all develop and work towards this principle of honesty. And then justice is another one of the principles. It's equal treatment and equal cases. So while justice usually has been used with reference to a standard of righteous fairness, often has been used with the regard of an ability to judge without reference to one's feelings or interests. Fairness has also been used to refer to the ability to make judgments that are not overly general, but that are concrete and specific to a particular case. Um, in any case, a notion of being treated as one deserves is crucial for both justice and fairness. If, some people need to be treated differently if they require special care over and above what other people need. And justice is about meeting everyone's needs fairly. I always tell students they are worried sometimes that they're not going to be able to follow all of the ethics within their profession. And part of that has to maybe do with beliefs or values. And I tell them that this probably is one of the hardest parts to follow. And I think I always am. I'm always greeted with people being really. They don't understand how this can be difficult, right? Just treating people fairly. But when it comes to resources, I'm sure all of you in your positions are well aware that there is a lack of resources in our communities for housing, for financial services, for addiction services, for mental health services. So, where does it come, and how do we find, if you have 5 people standing in front of you, how do we treat them all fairly with providing them equally the services that they are owed or that they qualify for? And so I always tell students that this probably was one of the hardest principles for me sometimes to follow, just because of the lack of resources. And so then learning how to really rely on your organization's policies and the law of, what order people receive those resources in. And then that's when that fairness comes into play, when we have to look back again at the laws and the policies of what to follow. It might not be fair when you look at it, having 5 people qualifying for the same services, and you can only provide 2 out of the 5 the services. So then we go one level further and we talk about, okay, then there's a policy that or a law that we have to follow, because we can't service all 5 people. And so we have to be aware of those policies when it comes to the resources, when it comes to justice. So what happens then when we are met with, we have 2 principles that clash with one another, or we fall into a situation where we don't know which direction to go. We have a situation and we have to make a decision. Do we choose A or B with a client? And so I'm going to go back to on the slide when we talk about confidentiality and safety. So one of those situations could be, what happens is, when do we break confidentiality? Confidentiality versus safety. When do we know to break that for a client or for others? How about, like I said, resource allocation, deciding how to distribute those limited resources fairly among clients? And then here's another one. How about, I've mentioned autonomy a couple times. What do we do when we look at this situation? Do we choose autonomy or do we choose protection? So that balancing that autonomy with the need for intervention when clients are at risk. So how do we address what we would consider, those 3 things that I just mentioned are ethical dilemmas. So how do we look at that? What do we look at? And so we like I said, we follow organizational policies, but then we also have to apply what's called ethical reasoning. And with that, we have to consider consequences. We have to look at our stakeholders' impact. And then again, that principles of justice that I talked about. So when we have those situations where we don't know, is it confidentiality or safety? Is it resource allocation or is it autonomy, protection? What do we do? Those things are called ethical dilemmas. So an ethical dilemma is a type of ethical issue that arises when the available choices and obligations in a specific situation do not allow for an ethical outcome. So, in such instances, a choice or action is required, and all of the available alternatives violate an explicit ethical principle or guideline. So, what do we do? Um, Everybody has access, most of us, I should say, have access to so many resources of how to figure this out. But where we go to look, you have to know where to look. So what we want to do is we want to if we have a situation, we can look at ethical decision making processes. And so the first thing we would want to do, there are 5 steps that I always tell people they should follow, is to define the problem and collect all of the relevant facts. And if you have a sheet of paper, go ahead and write these 5 down, because if we have time, I do have a little bit of a case study so that we can come up with some type of solution. So the first one in looking at is defining the problem and collect all of those relevant facts. And then the second one is identifying feasible options. What are some options? What are some resources? What are our policies? What are some things that you've done in the past? What are some new things that you haven't tried? So just identify all of the feasible options, no matter how silly they might look, no matter if you've tried them before or not. Just try to identify them. You want as many here as you possibly can. And then the third one would be to assess the effects of each option on the stakeholders. So then you take each one of those options and you assess the effect on the stakeholders. Everybody who's involved, that would be the client, that would be your agency, that would be the community, that would be yourself. You want to label each one of those stakeholders and you want to say, if I would choose this one and help the client with this one, how would that impact all of these stakeholders? Then the fourth one is establishing a criteria for determining the most appropriate action. What are the policies? Is there safety? Is there confidentiality? So establish that criteria for determining the most appropriate action. And then number 5, you'll want to select the best option based on the established criteria, which is the highest ranking for safety, for anything like that. And then you can determine with the client of what direction you should go. What I always tell people in the helping profession too is, when you're writing all these things down, you don't have to do these in isolation. Almost all of you have a supervisor that you can go to. And so I would say if you get to this point, that means that you're really having a difficult time of, this is a serious enough ethical dilemma that I'm going to look at these issues. And I'm going to look at them in a very systematic way to help me move forward in making a decision of what I'm going to be doing in this situation. So if you get to this point, I would definitely recommend that you would reach out to your supervisor. And it's always so good to have another set of eyes when you are at this point. So if you write these 5 down, like I said, and we will move forward. Then and try to do this in a case study and maybe do some group work here, because I think I am going a little faster than I normally do. I think I've only been on for about 40 minutes here, Kylie, so I might be running short on time. So I'll slow down here and maybe we should take some questions, Kylie, and just ask if anybody has any questions.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
They're probably all saying, I hope she keeps on going and we can get done early.
Yeah. There aren't any questions being typed right now. If anyone wants to come off mute instead of typing your question, you can sure do that too.
Okay, let's go on here. We're going to go on to the case study. So on this case study here, I do have it that we're going to discuss how we would handle this situation in small groups. Um, I'm not going to do you have a way to do breakout sessions, Kylie?
I am not familiar on how to do
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Um, and with the new Zoom, I haven't messed around with it enough to.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the case study here. So, what we want to do, sometimes it's really hard to um, kind of look at this information from a presentation and figure out how can I apply that. So what I want to do is I'll keep this up on the screen, but we have a situation where a client is refusing services that could help prevent their homelessness, despite your beliefs that they are not fully understanding the consequences of their decision. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and then I'm hoping that people answer this after they have taken just like a few minutes to do the approach that's over on the left side of your screen. So what I want you to do is I want you to answer these two questions. How would you respect their autonomy while addressing your ethical concern? And what step would you take to ensure they are fully informed of their choices? So that is just a little case study. And so I'm going to go ahead and have you take, I'll watch my clock here. I'm going to have you take 5 minutes um, and read through the case study and look at the ethical decision making framework. Use that framework and answer your questions. I will go ahead and set my timer here for 5 minutes. We might not need a full 5 minutes unless people want more time, but it hasn't even been a minute yet. Okay, we have 1 more minute. Okay, we'll come back together and I'm going to look over on that left side of your screen and we're going to go through the approach that you use to help with the ethical decision making. So let's identify the problem. Who would like to share what they think the ethical issue is at hand? You can just unmute your microphone.
I guess you're worried that they don't understand the consequences.
Right. And what can happen if they're not, what is your fear of them not understanding that?
That they're not making an informed decision.
Right. Is there anybody else that had a different problem that you identified?
The worry that if they don't have enough information or they don't have the right information, they're going to become homeless.
Mm-hmm. Good one. One time when I did this, the group of professionals thought about if the client was going to be refusing services, it could also impact maybe how their organization would look at them, and if something would happen to that client, that they maybe didn't do their part in helping this client get their home. And so they were actually worried about their own ramification of what might be happening as well within their own organization. Okay. Anything else, or should we go on to the next one? We ready to go on to the next one? That kind of leads you into the next one, evaluating the options of what are the possible actions and what are their consequences. One was already said that they might not get housing, right? What are some more consequences of their decision?
It will be more difficult to obtain housing with an eviction on their record.
And you would probably know that because of experience that you've maybe had with other clients, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might affect their ability to continue employment. It might be hard to work for them if they don't have a home.
Yeah. One participant a while back talked about, of course, we never know with case studies, but what if they have children? And if they don't have a home, they could maybe have their children taken away.
There's a couple comments in the chat box. One said they might not get the opportunity again. And if they refuse services now, it might affect them in the future.
Okay. If this were you, let's go on to the next one. It's the third step. Seek advice from colleagues, supervisor, ethic boards. So where would you guys go within your organizations to seek out assistance?
Maybe another one of your team members that's working with the client, or your supervisor, or another resource that maybe you have a release of information for.
Okay, good. So making a decision, how do we choose the best action then, considering the principles and the client's interests? So if we go back to the principles here that we talked about, if we are using all of these core principles that we talked about, these 8, how can we use honesty, respect, accountability? How can we use all of those when we get to making a decision? How could we move forward with helping this client in the most ethical way possible.
Did you work through like scenarios with them of like, if this happens, this is how it could impact other areas of your life, or like if you chose to make this decision, like these are the things that may need to happen?
Right. And what I really liked about what you said about that is one of the things you didn't say was, you didn't say, if I were you, I would do this or that or this or that, right? You didn't say that. What you did is you were giving them all of the possible outcomes, right? You were giving them the most information. You were being honest. You were being respectful, knowing that they could still turn down this opportunity for some reason. And but not once did I hear you say that if I were you, right, I would take this opportunity. So I appreciate that you didn't do that. Anybody else?
A couple in the chat. One says, respect whatever decision they make, even if you don't think it is the right one. And you need to respect them and build rapport for them to trust you and others. Always have open communication.
Right. And that falls right back. That falls right back on all of those principles. You just used all of those principles while going through this case study. So anything specific having to do with respecting, anything more about respecting their autonomy while addressing that ethical concern? I can definitely think of things that maybe we have felt inside that make this difficult. What would make it difficult inside you? What are some things that you might be feeling as you are doing this the right way, the ethical way? Because it's not easy all the time.
There
If
might
they
not.
do become homeless, you may feel guilty because you might feel, if only I'd given them more information, or if only I presented it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it's
Yes.
not really your response. The outcome wouldn't necessarily be your responsibility. It would be the person who's making the decision.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of you have already answered, what steps would you take to ensure they are fully informed as well. And then I always recommend to people that somehow you document that you followed an ethical decision making framework, because then what you're doing is you're taking, when you follow one of these ethical decision making models, what you're actually doing is you're taking, I'm going to go back a minute, you're actually taking out, I'm going to go way back to the beginning. You're actually taking out some of your own personal values and your own personal beliefs. And you're not leading so much with your gut. If you can follow these principles, we never want you to not follow your values and follow your beliefs. But when you're working with somebody else's life, when you're following an ethical way of working, you truly are following the principles more than your gut response of how you should respond. Because anytime we don't want to get rid of our gut responses, because I think that's really important that we keep that within us. It makes us who we are, but we always want to check that with our ethical obligations. Okay, are there any questions about the little case study? Okay. Now, so that was just a case study that I had made up. If you want to put this in the chat and keep it confidential, and then Kylie can read it, is there a situation that any of you are currently working where you think it falls into maybe you're having an ethical dilemma trying to decide which way to go with a situation? And we can all maybe help you process that with the information that we received today. You can unmute and say it out loud as well, but if you want to keep it confidentiality, you certainly can share that with Kylie. Is there any in there, Kylie?
No, there is one. I think I had to step away for just a brief second.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
think this one came in prior to your previous question. But they said I would be concerned of the negative impact on them being homeless and how that would affect them.
Mm-hmm. And I think if you would ever get to a point where we don't think about some of those things, I think it may be a case of maybe having the difficulties of our work affecting how we have empathy. And so I like hearing that, those are some of the outcomes that we wouldn't want to happen. Because if we would just start thinking, well, it's their own, it's their own bed, they have to lie in it. But if we start thinking that way, I would be worried about some other things with ethics. So I really like the responses that you guys had. I think they were very empathetic and kind and caring, and so I'm really glad to hear that. So I had talked in the beginning, and you guys can still write an example if you have one in there. I think we will have some time to review that at the end here. I only have a couple more slides left, but we'll go on ahead and finish, even if we finish early. But so who can make use of this information on ethics? So truly it is anybody, even if you're not in the helping profession, if you're in a business, if you are in the helping profession, if you're in a business role, if in any time you're working with anybody or doing anything, we want to make sure that all of us have high ethical standards. And I think what's really nice is if organizations and people within those organizations can commit to following the principles of ethics, I really think it makes it somewhat easier for the next person to come along. And when they're working with somebody, then they know that this person was also treated with respect, and this person was also treated with honesty. And so that maybe that level of mistrust that our clients have can diminish a little bit. So the more we can get on the same page when it comes to ethical standards and ethical conduct, I think it truly is best for us and our clients and the organizations we serve. In my summary, my next slide, after the key points, there's one part that I want to address there. And there are some key takeaways. But before I do that, I want to talk about what happens if we are doing well and we are following these principles, but others within our organization are not following the ethical principles. As a licensed social worker, I do have a responsibility to report that, whether that person is licensed or not. And so I think for us to have these higher ethical standards, I think we can all say that it would be best for us to report that in some way. And so I think it is best that when we see things that are unethical, that we report it and we address that unethical behavior. I believe that all of us have a responsibility to report. Um, we must report that unethical behavior or violations of policy, whether by clients or colleagues. And this can be very difficult, but I do think that it's about safety, and I think it's about care and concern. Sometimes people don't look at reporting as an ethical duty, and they also don't look at it as having care and concern. But I think if you can see that somebody is not following those principles, and you can see that it could possibly have a negative outcome, I always encourage people to report that. And then when we do that, though, we want to make sure that we use those proper channels. I would never encourage anybody to report an unethical situation that they maybe have witnessed or that they have seen and report that to their coworker. I would take that directly to a supervisor. I don't think it does anybody any good to what I call murmur and go to your colleague. I think it is more important to go to a supervisor and share it up rather than sideways. So use those proper channels such as supervisors. Oftentimes we don't have ethics committees unless you are in a state position, or unless you are in a political situation, or legal, like if you're an attorney. But everybody should have some type of human resource department too. So if you're not feeling comfortable reporting that to your supervisor, I would definitely report that to the human resources departments. So just some takeaways. I truly believe that ethical principles are foundational in all helping professions. It doesn't matter if someone is licensed or not licensed. I think if we're working with people, we all have to have a set of standards. And those principles are the set of standards that we could all maybe get on the same page and adopt. Always prioritize that respect, dignity, and fairness in your work. I remember growing up, we were always taught in school, treat people how you want to be treated. And I think that has a lot to do with ethics. I really do. Although ethics are laws, I believe that they're based somewhat out of those things that I was told when I was younger. Use ethical decision-making frameworks to navigate those complex situations. I I think even if it's not a complex situation, I would say go ahead and use one of those, because it forces you to generate additional ways of thinking. And so I think that that can be really helpful to not be so narrowly focused on just one solution. Oftentimes, if we can get more ideas on paper, we might still come back to our original solution, but at least you can say that you looked outside the box and you looked at other ways of solving problems. Understand and maintain those professional boundaries. In my line of work, I have seen many clients harmed by people not having healthy boundaries with clients. And I truly believe that it probably started out of a way of being kind. But then what ends up happening, it goes into something that can be very negative and a safety issue for our clients. And I just think that we all have to learn ethical ways of showing kindness and not breaking those professional and personal boundaries. And then report that unethical behavior and act with integrity at all times. I think if we can all do that, that would just help get us in a way of being on the same page when it comes to ethics. And this is actually evidence-based. It suggests a strong ethical culture. So what I'm saying is an ethical culture there is that if you can, in your staff meetings, look at one another and say, you know what, I believe that we should all follow ethical principles. And I think you have a foundation then to move forward, and everybody can act in that same manner. Because what research is saying is if you can find that ethical culture within your organization, you can provide some great benefits to an organization. It can help with job satisfaction. It can help with effective communication, affective commitment, and a willingness to recommend your organization to others. And then I think this is really important. And I think this is probably one of the biggest takeaways, because I know working in the professions we do, sometimes employee burnout can really, really become rampant. And so I think if we develop this culture, this ethical culture, it can really help with an increased intention for people to stay in the work that is so meaningful and impactful for the people in our communities. So that is why I do what I do in training on ethics. I will open it up for questions, but Kylie, I think I talked a little too fast today. I apologize for that.
You're totally fine. As of right now, there's no questions, but I'll give it a little bit here.
There we go. I stopped sharing my screen.
I do know the wind is howling outside.
Is it? I am not in Bismarck today. I'm over on the eastern part of the state today. If any of you within your organizations are interested in any ethical presentations, I have wonderful people that I work with that this really is our passion, and we can adapt it to your organization, and we can adapt it to the profession that you're in. If you have additional questions. Who doesn't want to work in a good work environment, right? That's why I like that research. We all want to work in a positive environment. And this is just one way that we can contribute to that. It has been my pleasure being with you guys again today.
Someone did private message me here. Let me see. How do you ethically report management if they are treating employees unfairly or playing favorites?
You know, that's a difficult one. And I think what I have helped people do before is I really do think, number one, going up instead of going out is the first thing. I think murmuring can make things like tenfold worse, right? Sometimes I think we don't have all the information presented to us, but I think if we look at those principles, right, and if we want to stay in the professional realm, sometimes putting some of those feelings down a little bit in the reactionary part of the response, and just looking at it in an ethical decision making way. You can look at that, and you can even do that within your own situation. And then I think looking at your policy, looking at your organizational structure, I think that is all always helpful. I teach students all the time that that in order to make change and be effective in doing that, we have to rise above. We can use our feelings as a motivator, but we sometimes have to rise above the emotion of it to get our heads clear. And once our heads become a little bit clearer, it helps us. It really does help us figure out what to do next. I would always encourage people to have a conversation with their supervisor. Remember, we're talking about honesty, we're talking about assertiveness, and I'm not saying that's not challenging at all. But then I think that, like I said, there's also human resources. I think a thing that's really hard in an organization is when people gather together and then move forward. I think organizations, the structure in organizations sometimes do much better if people don't form a group and then lead with a group. Because I think organizations are very interested in how it's impacting the individuals, and then they go outside to see how it's affecting the organizations. So I would use my resources well. I would use the ethical dilemma frameworks, and then you could take that forward in the next level of organizational structure. And possibly bringing solutions forward with the difficulty that you're having.
Excuse me, anybody else have any questions? There's a lot of thank yous and great presentation, great information in the chat for you.
Good, good. Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I hope everybody stays warm and safe.
All right, well, I think
All
we'll
right.
wrap it up, but thank you,
All
Heidi,
right.
for taking
You're
time out to
welcome.
present, and
You betcha.
thank you everybody for attending. Just a reminder, we do not have a presentation next week due to Thanksgiving. So I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. Stay safe out there with this lovely winter weather rolling in. And we will be back on December 3rd with North Dakota Housing Finance Agency with Jennifer Henderson. So hope you all can make it then. Thank you so much.
Great. Have a beautiful rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.